The Watcher in the Dark. Tell Late Night Story. A horror story by TThe. The Place of the Brave. Would you notice if someone was watching you? Late at night, in the quiet stillness of a dimly lit park, an uneasy feeling creeps in. A pair of eyes, unblinking, calculating, follow every step. At first, it's just a hunch, a trick of the mind. But what if it isn't? As two friends make their way home, a silent figure lingers in the shadows, his gaze heavy, his presence inescapable. And when he moves, the real nightmare begins. Who is he? Why is he watching? And most terrifying of all, what waits for them beyond the park's edge? Some things are scarier than ghosts. Sometimes the real monsters walk among us. Welcome to TThe, the Place of the Brave. Are you ready to face the darkness? Subscribe and stay brave. I don't remember exactly when it started, but at some point I became aware of an unsettling sensation, a pair of eyes fixed on me. A chill crept down my spine, that eerie, instinctive feeling of being watched. It wasn't immediate, but the longer I ignored it, the stronger it grew. Finally, I turned my head, scanning my surroundings. And that's when I saw him. A man stood near the entrance of the park, partially obscured by the dim glow of the streetlights. He appeared to be in his late 40s or early 50s, tall and gaunt, with a slightly hunched posture. His dark coat, worn and frayed at the edges, hung loosely from his frame, as if he had been standing there for hours. Between his fingers, a half-burnt cigarette glowed faintly, sending thin wisps of smoke curling into the cold night air. But it wasn't his appearance that unsettled me the most. It was the way he stood there, motionless, silent, watching. His gaze was steady, unblinking. Not in a casual, passing manner, nor even in a way that suggested curiosity. No, his stare felt deliberate, heavy, as if he was studying us. The kind of look that made you feel exposed, vulnerable, as though he could see something in you that even you weren't aware of. The world around us moved as usual. Cars passed by in the distance, the rustling of leaves echoed softly in the breeze, and the occasional murmur of late-night park visitors filled the air. But he remained frozen, a shadow in the night, an anomaly in the rhythm of the city. I swallowed, my pulse quickening. Was he just a harmless passerby, lost in thought? Or was there something more sinister lurking behind that unwavering stare? I turned back to my companion, lowering my voice. Do you see that man over there? The unease in my tone must have been obvious because her expression changed immediately. Slowly, Abigail glanced in the direction I indicated, and then something even more unsettling happened. The man, who had been completely still just moments ago, tilted his head slightly. Not much, just enough to make it clear that he had noticed our attention. Then a faint, almost imperceptible smile crept onto his lips. Not a warm smile, not even a friendly one. It was something else entirely. A smile that sent a fresh wave of... At first I tried to reason with myself. Maybe he was just another late-night wanderer, resting after a long day. Parks weren't exactly deserted at night. There were always people passing through, taking shortcuts home, walking their dogs, or simply enjoying the quiet. But something felt off. The way he looked at us. It wasn't the casual glance of someone idly observing their surroundings. His gaze was too focused, too sharp. It felt as though he had been watching us for a while, unnoticed until now. A cold sensation slithered down my spine. I clenched my hands into fists, forcing myself to stay calm, to not overreact. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was letting paranoia get the best of me. But then I noticed something else. The cigarette between his fingers had barely burned down at all. The ember at its tip flickered faintly, but no smoke curled from it anymore. He wasn't smoking it. He was just holding it, like a prop. A small detail, almost insignificant, but it made something deep in my gut twist with unease. I turned back to Abigail, forcing my voice to remain steady, but I needed her to understand. Abby, we should leave. She heard the urgency in my voice. I saw it in the way her eyes flickered with quiet apprehension before she nodded slightly. Okay, she murmured, keeping her tone neutral. We turned, trying to make our exit seem natural, like we had simply decided it was time to go, nothing more. The last thing we wanted was to make it obvious that we were afraid. But then, a movement, a shadow shifting in the corner of my vision. I resisted the urge to look back, but I knew. He had started walking, not toward the park exit, toward us. My heart pounded, each beat loud in my ears. I fought to keep my pace even, my posture relaxed, as if I hadn't noticed. But my mind was racing, calculating the distance between us and the nearest street, the safest route, the best way to disappear into the city. Then Abigail did something that made my breath catch. She glanced over her shoulder, just for a second, just long enough to confirm what I already suspected. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The slight tensing of her shoulders, the way she subtly quickened her steps, those told me everything. He was following us, not hurriedly, not running, just walking, steady, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. We reached the edge of the park, stepping onto the sidewalk where the streetlights were brighter, where the occasional car passed by. I exhaled, the tension in my chest easing just slightly. But then Abigail's hand grasped my wrist. Tight, urgent. Her voice was barely a whisper. He's still coming. And I knew in that moment that we were not imagining things. That man, whoever he wasn't just a stranger in the night. He was following us, and he wasn't planning on stopping. If you love spine-chilling stories, mysterious encounters, and tales that make you question what's real, you're in the right place. Subscribe to TThe, the place of the brave, and become part of a community that dares to explore the unexplained. Like this video if you enjoy real horror experiences and stories that keep you up at night. Turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying new story, because trust me, some things are best heard before the lights go out. Are you brave enough to keep listening? Hit subscribe and find out. Abigail met my gaze, her expression calm but betraying the same unease I felt. She flicked her eyes toward the man briefly, just a quick glance, but it was enough. I saw the tension in her posture, the slight tightness in her lips. She felt it too. Yeah. Let's go, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. We moved carefully, standing up from the bench with measured ease. No sudden movements, no panic. If this man truly had ill intentions, the last thing we wanted was to provoke him. Running could turn a mere stalker into a pursuer, a simple glance into a chase. So we acted normal, pretended we were just two friends deciding to leave the park after a late-night chat. I forced myself to breathe evenly, to keep my shoulders relaxed. The path leading out of the park stretched ahead of us, lined with dim streetlights and patches of shadow. It wasn't far, just a short walk to the main road where the occasional car passed by. Safety wasn't out of reach. But the moment we started walking, I felt it. The weight of his stare. I didn't need to turn around to know. He was still watching us. I could almost sense the moment he shifted, his stance changing ever so slightly. The way the cigarette, forgotten between his fingers, never reached his lips. The way he stood, like a predator deciding whether or not to follow. Step by step, we moved forward. Each footfall felt too loud, too deliberate. The tension coiled in my chest, a silent battle between logic and fear. If we ran, would he chase us? If we stayed too long, would he get closer? Then, Abigail's fingers brushed against my wrist, a fleeting touch, a silent signal. I understood immediately. He was moving, not fast, not aggressively, but he was following. I resisted the urge to look back, to confirm what my instincts were already screaming at me. Instead, I kept walking, my pace steady but subtly quicker. Abigail did the same, her breathing measured but tight. The park exit was within reach now, the glow of passing headlights just beyond, almost there, almost safe. But then something changed, a shift in the air, the sound of footsteps, closer, steady. I couldn't stop myself this time. I turned my head, just a fraction, just enough to glimpse, and there he was. The man, still expressionless, still eerily composed, was walking behind us. Not too close, not too far, just enough to let us know that he was there. A cold wave of adrenaline surged through me. My fingers curled into fists. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to hold back. Not yet. Not until we reached the street. Abigail and I exchanged a look, one that needed no words. The moment we stepped beyond the park's entrance, into the light, into the open, we would run. We walked, step by step, keeping our pace as natural as possible. The park, usually a place of quiet solace, now felt vast and empty, every shadow stretching too far, every sound magnified in the stillness of the night. I could hear the whisper of the wind rustling through the trees, the faint hum of a distant car, and the rhythmic crunch of our footsteps on the gravel path. But beneath it all, there was something else. A silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that felt deliberate. I didn't dare look back, not yet. If he realized we were aware of him, would that make him act? Would he pick up his pace? Would he run? The thought made my chest tighten. Every instinct in me screamed that we were not safe, that we needed to leave. But fear was a fickle thing. It could either keep you cautious or make you reckless. And recklessness in a situation like this could be dangerous. Abigail was tense beside me, but she mirrored my movements perfectly, as if we had rehearsed this moment. Every step we took was synchronized, our unspoken agreement clear: do not panic, do not run, not yet. But the feeling only grew stronger. That suffocating, heavy sensation, like a hand pressing down on the back of my neck. I had to look. I couldn't stop myself. I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance over my shoulder. My stomach dropped. The man was no longer standing still. He was moving. Not toward us, not directly, but toward something else. A vehicle. A white van parked just beyond the entrance of the park, its silhouette barely visible under the dim streetlights. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. The van hadn't been there before, or had it? Had it been waiting? Had he been waiting? Panic flared in my chest, a sudden electric jolt of realization. The situation had just changed. This wasn't just about being watched anymore. This was about intent. A man watching from afar was one thing. A man following us was another. But a man walking toward a van in the dead of night? That was something else entirely. "Abby," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't need me to explain. She must have sensed the shift. The way my posture had changed, she knew. "We need to go, now." Her hand found mine, gripping tightly for just a second before letting go. It wasn't for comfort, it was a signal. Together we moved faster, not running, not yet, but walking with purpose. The street was just ahead. If we could just reach it, if we could get into the open, we'd have options. More people, more lights, more places to go. I forced myself not to look back again. I needed to focus on getting out of here, but the sound of footsteps, his footsteps, was gone. That was worse. Much worse. I didn't know where he was anymore. I didn't know if he was still walking toward the van, or if he was already inside it, or if he was... No. I shut the thought down before it could take shape. I needed to think clearly. We were almost at the park entrance. A few more steps, and we'd be on the sidewalk, back in the city, away from the suffocating darkness of the trees. Then, out of the corner of my eye, movement, a door opening, the van. I grabbed Abigail's wrist, my grip firmer this time. "Run!" She didn't hesitate. We bolted. The sound of our footsteps shattered the silence, slamming against the pavement as we sprinted toward the street. My breath came fast and sharp, adrenaline flooding my veins, but I didn't dare look back. Looking back meant slowing down. We reached the sidewalk, stumbling onto the busy street where headlights flashed by, the real world crashing into focus. People, cars, streetlights. We had made it. But I still didn't feel safe. Abigail was gasping beside me, her hands on her knees as she tried to catch her breath. But I couldn't stop. I turned, finally allowing myself to look back toward the park entrance. The van was still there, but the man was gone. I scanned the area, my pulse thudding in my ears. Was he inside the van, watching us from the darkness, or had he slipped away into the city, disappearing into the crowd like a phantom? A horn blared, jolting me out of my thoughts. I turned back to Abigail, who had straightened, her eyes wide but steady. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice urgent but controlled. "He could still be watching." She was right. Just because we had escaped the park didn't mean we were safe. I took a deep breath, my heart still pounding. "Let's find somewhere crowded, a cafe, a store, anywhere with people." Abigail nodded, and without another word, we kept moving. As we walked into the city, disappearing into the neon-lit streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the shadows, he was still watching. The van sat at the edge of the park, parked just beneath a flickering streetlight. It was large, wide, its paint dulled with age, and the most unsettling part, the back doors were slightly ajar. That detail sent a jolt of terror through me, sharper than anything else that had happened tonight. The man reached for the door and pulled it open wider, stepping inside. I couldn't see much, just a sliver of darkness within, but my gut screamed that he wasn't alone. Someone or something was inside that van, waiting. A chill slithered down my spine. Abigail's fingers wrapped around my wrist, her grip tight, urgent. "We need to go now," she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't hesitate this time. I grabbed her hand and picked up the pace, walking so fast we were nearly running. The dim streetlights overhead flickered erratically, casting long, distorted shadows on the pavement. Then, behind us, the sound of an engine turning over. My breath caught. The van's headlights flared to life, casting harsh beams through the park entrance. The deep rumble of the engine cut through the silence, vibrating through my ribs like an unspoken warning. I risked one last glance over my shoulder. The van was moving. Not fast, not yet, but rolling forward, its tires crunching against the pavement. I squeezed Abigail's hand, my heart hammering. "Go, go!" We ran, not in a full sprint, not yet. Running too soon would be like triggering a predator's instinct. But we weaved through the thinning crowds on the sidewalk, dodging pedestrians, moving with purpose. The city was alive around us now. Cars, neon signs, people talking and laughing, but all of that felt distant, blurred, as if we were trapped in a different reality where only the van and the man inside it mattered. I didn't want to look back again, but I had to. I turned my head just enough to see. The van had reached the intersection behind us. It didn't stop. It turned, following. My stomach twisted into knots. "They're tailing us," I gasped. Abigail cursed under her breath. She already knew. We couldn't just keep running blindly. We needed a plan, somewhere safe, somewhere public enough that they wouldn't try anything. "There," Abigail pointed ahead, her voice clipped. "A convenience store. Cameras, people." It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. We pushed forward, slipping through the automatic doors just as the van rolled past the storefront, its headlights sweeping across the glass. The moment we were inside, I doubled over, trying to steady my breathing. My lungs burned, my pulse erratic. A bored-looking cashier barely glanced at us from behind the counter, occupied with his phone. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, sterile and artificial, but right now they were a comfort. Abigail tugged my sleeve, her voice low. "Did they stop?" I turned just enough to peek outside through the racks of snack displays. The van hadn't parked. It had kept driving, slowly, before disappearing down the next street. But I wasn't relieved, not yet, because something told me this wasn't over. Abigail exhaled shakily, brushing a hand through her hair. What the hell was that? I shook my head. I had no answers, only more fear, more questions. Who was that man? And what would have happened if we hadn't noticed him in time? The thought made my skin crawl. I turned back to Abigail, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. We're not going home alone tonight. She nodded, understanding immediately, because whoever they were, whoever was in that van, they had been prepared for something, and I wasn't about to find out what. If you love spine-chilling stories, mysterious encounters, and tales that make you question what's real, you're in the right place. Subscribe to TThe, the place of the brave, and become part of a community that dares to explore the unexplained. Like this video if you enjoy real horror experiences and stories that keep you up at night. Turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying new story, because trust me, some things are best heard before the lights go out. Are you brave enough to keep listening? Hit subscribe and find out. The harsh fluorescent lights of the convenience store buzzed overhead, casting an artificial brightness over the cramped aisles of snacks and bottled drinks. The hum of the refrigerator blended with the faint sound of a radio playing somewhere behind the counter. It should have felt safe. It should have been a relief. But it wasn't. Abigail stood beside me, her breath still uneven, her fingers gripping the edge of a shelf as she steadied herself. I could see the way her eyes kept darting toward the glass doors, the way her body was wound tight like a spring waiting to snap. I forced myself to look outside. The van had passed. It didn't stop. It hadn't parked. It had just moved on. But my gut told me it wasn't over. This wasn't random. This wasn't just some late-night creep. The way the man had watched us, the way he had moved, the way the van had been waiting, it was too deliberate, too planned. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone with trembling fingers. My first instinct was to call someone, police, a friend, anyone. But what would I even say? That a man had been watching us? That a van had followed us for a few blocks? There was no crime in that. No proof. Just a sickening feeling that we had come too close to something we weren't meant to escape. Abigail exhaled sharply beside me. We're not going home alone. I nodded. We'll get a cab. Go somewhere crowded. She swallowed, still shaken. And if we see that van again? I met her gaze, my voice steady, despite the fear crawling under my skin. Then we run. We waited in the store for another 10 minutes, just to be sure. When we finally stepped outside, the night air was cool against my flushed skin. The streets weren't empty, but they weren't as busy as I would have liked. Every car that passed made my pulse jump. Every dark corner felt like it was hiding something. A cab pulled up, its headlights cutting through the gloom. We climbed in without hesitation. As the driver pulled away, I risked one last look out the back window. The van was nowhere to be seen, but the feeling, the awareness of something unseen, something watching, lingered. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe we had escaped. Maybe the man had just lost interest. Or maybe he was still out there, waiting, watching for someone else. Would you have noticed the watcher in the dark? Subscribe to TThe, the place of the brave. Stay safe. Stay aware. Death.